Broadcasting from the dark corners of the earth, it's Tom Mordred's Midnight Radio. I should just stop doing that voice. I don't know why I feel the need to do that voice. We're going to be continuing with good old Alien Bodies by Doctor Who.
By Doctor Who?
Alien Bodies by Lawrence Miles, of the Doctor Who franchise. A ship was arriving, an alien ship. There's some kind of auction happening in which it's happening on Earth, and a bunch of aliens have been invited, and all these aliens are very unique, including the Time Lords who have shown up with one of their representatives, and he's from the future, where Gallifrey appears to be embroiled in some kind of war, and very little is known about this war and the enemy. There's, of course, Faction Paradox. This is their first appearance. They're there for some reason. Who else is there? There's the Shift, a conceptual entity. There's Mr. Trask, who appears to be a corpse. And the whole thing is run by... Oh, and Unisic. Unisic is some kind of future version of Unit that kind of sucks. We'll be reintroduced to these characters as we jump in. Alright, I'm just going to jump in. 5. The Continuity Bomb. Bregman fished out the invite card of her pocket, and then tried to read the small print. The light was still blazing off the surface of the card, even here inside the ziggurat. The words at the bottom of the text were blurred, and the letters kept shifting themselves around in front of Bregman's eyes. Or rather, her eyes kept shifting themselves around in front of the letters. When the card had been lab-tested in Geneva, the English analysts had reported the text to be in English, the French analysts had reported the text to be in French, the German analysts reported the text to be in German, and the Swiss analysts had reported the text to be in English, French, and German, all at the same time. Well? The girl asked the girl who called herself Sam. Bregman started squinting. There's something here about suitable accommodation will be provided, but I don't know if... Does that word look like hospitality or hospital to you? Hospitality. Thank God for that. Bregman cast her eyes around the guest room Mr. Quixotle had provided for her and the Colonel. As expected, the walls were made of stone and had flaming torches nailed to them. But apart from that, the decor was pretty acceptable. There were 2 beds, both covered in duvets There were 2 beds, both covered in duvets that could have consumed whole armies. A few smaller pieces of furniture were scattered around the room, soft armchairs in soft colors, even a couple of padded footstools. Sam was checking the fixtures out, and the fittings as well, but she didn't look happy. Don't you think there's something odd about all this? She said. Don't tell me. Beneath this layer of apparent comfort lie the psychic tendrils of an alien mind parasite. Sam Blatt stared at her blankly. What, really? I was quoting. Unisic training film. Okay, I'll go along with you. What's odd about all this? This stuff. Sam experimentally prodded an armchair, but it absolutely refused to turn into a hideous alien shapeshifter and bite her hand off. I mean, it's cozy, yeah, but what's the style supposed to be? Style? I don't know. No style. It's just an armchair. But there's no such thing as just an armchair, right? If someone English makes a chair, the chair looks kind of Englishy. If someone African makes a chair, it looks kind of African-y. This chair doesn't look anything-y. Sam indicated some of the furnishings around the room. A couple of weeks ago, I was in the 40th century, and all the chairs there looked all 40th century-ish. I suppose you only start noticing this kind of thing when you time travel a lot. What did you say? Said Bregman. I said the chairs in the 40th century. No, to hell with the chairs. I meant about... Bregman realized she had no way of asking the question, what do you mean time travel, without sounding like a moron, so she shut up. Sam kept talking. If Quixotle's a time traveller too, and he knew he was going to have to do this room up specially for humans, I'd have thought he'd go out and look at human furniture in a history book or something. But these chairs and things don't look like they come from any period in history. Great. The chairs aren't what they seem. Bregman glanced over her shoulder at Cortez as she said it. The colonel was sitting cross-legged on one of the beds, eyes closed, hands on knees, still meditating. You could give him a good slap around the ears right now, thought Bregman, and he still wouldn't come back down to earth. Somehow she resisted the temptation to test this hypothesis. Stam was still antagonizing the upholstery. I'm thinking about what the doctor said. Biodata. Do you think you could tell what kind of furniture someone might like, just from what's in their biology? Bregman shrugged. Possible. You're talking about DNA, that kind of thing. If you know someone's got 2 legs and a tush from what's in their genes, you can probably figure out what kind of chairs they'd want to sit on. Sam snapped her fingers. And you know, what light frequencies and stuff their eyes respond to. You can work out the best color scheme for them. Like this room. It's so, I don't know, tasteful. You know what I think? I think this whole place was put together using your biodata as a what's-it, as a template. Bregman mimed a round of applause. Jesus, you're good at this. All I know is you're supposed to shake hands with them if they've got arms, and shoot them if they've got tentacles growing out of their faces. And even as she said it, something flashed across Bregman's mind, something bright and clear and unexpected. She wasn't sure, but she guessed from the outside her eyes would be popping out of her head like she'd seen a vision of the Virgin Mary. You all right? Asked Sam. I think I just had a great idea, said Bregman. Trask was smiling, and had been ever since the human woman had come to the room. The smile had started out as a muscular twitch, the result of a social impulse Trask hadn't actually had any use for in nearly 400 years. Since the woman had left, he'd have no reason to change his expression, so he hadn't bothered resetting his facial muscles. He certainly wasn't happy, though. He wasn't anything much. He was aware, as always, of his responsibilities, and that was as close to self-awareness as he wanted to get. His controllers had charged him with the task of recovering the relic and carrying it back to Mictlan by whatever means became necessary. Beyond that, there was nothing of importance to consider. No need for any new thoughts inside of his head. Ideas are for the living. For the first time in decades, Trask felt himself flinch. Ideas are for the living. It was true, of course. It was very true. But the thought was, in itself, an idea. Please don't be alarmed, Mr. Trask. It's only me. The shift. The first entity Trask had encountered when he'd returned to Earth, when he'd turned up at the city entrance with the sun searing his eyes and the heat of the forest burning the dead flesh off his limbs. The shift was in his head, nestling in the back of his brain. I apologize for my directness, Mr. Trask. Usually I'd be much more subtle when communicating with a more physical being than myself. However, your quarters are a little sparse. Not much opportunity for manifestation, if you understand me. Yes, said Trask, thinking on his feet. And there aren't many concepts in your mind I can easily, shall we say, inhabit. This is why I'm speaking to you directly through the creative centers of your brain. This would kill any living creature, I'm sure. However, your creative centers aren't doing very much at the moment. No offense intended. No offense taken, Trask replied. Another bidder has arrived in the city, Mr. Trask. I thought you should be informed. Nobody seems to know who he is or what effect he might have on the auction. Trask thought about this for a moment or two. And? Mr. Trask, I know who you represent, and you know who I represent. Naturally, I'm happy for us to keep each other's secrets, but you'd have to admit our objectives are in opposition, shall we say. Officially, our respective employers wouldn't want anyone to know we've had even this degree of contact. Trask nodded, but said nothing. The balance of power must be maintained, Mr. Trask. A threat to your people is also a threat to mine. He's coming. Perhaps you'll see what I mean. Good afternoon, said a new voice. It took Trask a while to figure out that it had come from somewhere on the outside of his head. There was someone standing at the threshold of his room. Trask wasn't sure about the man's species, but he stank of life. He was tall, slim, long-legged. He looked shocked when Trask made eye contact with him, but recovered himself quite well. "Nice to see a happy face round here," said the man, smiling genially. "I don't think we've met. My name's Smith, or at least that's the nom de guerre I seem to keep ending up with, lifetime after lifetime. At least I didn't choose it myself this time. And you are—" "Trask," said Trask. "Ah, well, I was wondering if you could help me. I'm looking for Mr. Quixotle. I don't suppose you have any idea—" The man's eyes were darting around the room, taking in the decor, or lack of it. "No," Trask said. The stranger nodded, apparently having run out of things to say. Yes, well, I'm sure I'll be seeing more of you later. Anyway, goodbye for now, Mr. Trask." The man turned to go, then stopped dead. He glanced over his shoulder, just briefly. "And you, Mr. Shift?" A moment later, he was gone. "You see?" Trask nodded. "I've got things to do before the auction, Mr. Trask. I thought it was only fair to warn you about this new— well, let's not call it a threat. Let's call it a concern." "Thank you," croaked Trask, but the Shift didn't reply. Alone again, Trask considered the concern. He wasn't convinced the new bidder would make any difference to his plans. Whoever the man Smith was, he was life, and all life was susceptible. An entirely unexpected thought suddenly unraveled inside of Trask's head. Life. When he'd seen Smith, the first thing he'd noticed hadn't been the man's face, or his body, or his clothes. It had been the quality of life. Stronger than it was in most organisms, strong enough that you could smell it, if you knew what to smell for. Trask had only scented that kind of intensity in a living thing once before, and that had been in the early years, when he'd taken his life for granted. The early years. The final moments. Trask remembered being under the water, choking on his last mouthful of oxygen, but not being able to let it go. His arms, weaker than they should have been, were trying to pull the rest of his body up to the surface. His hands broke free of the water, touched the air above his head, but something was dragging him down, tugging at his ankles. There was liquid pressing against every inch of skin, searching for an opening, ready to fill up his lungs. It was supposed to be a good way to die, a peaceful way, but Trask knew it'd all be over soon, and he gave up and tried to breathe in. That was the hardest thing to take. Knowing that when he died, it would be his fault. There was no peace in a death like that. And then he saw the face, hovering in the air on the other side of the surface, inches above his head. The face was old, serious, a terrible frown stretched between a pair of sagging cheeks. The man who'd brought him here to die. Trask looked up at the man and saw him for what he was. Life. Sheer life. And the quality was infectious. So infectious that Trask managed to fight against the lake for a good 30 seconds more before the last of the air slipped out of his lungs. So infectious that even now, sitting in the ziggurat centuries later, Trask could feel the panic and the nausea seeping into his nervous system, even though he knew he was supposed to be dead to feeling. Life. The man who'd appeared in the doorway of the guest room had been just the man on the other side of the water. His face was different, though. Younger. So it couldn't be, surely it couldn't be, the same man. Smith. Or at least that's the nom de guerre I keep ending up with lifetime after lifetime. Unless... keep ending up with lifetime after lifetime. Was it possible, lifetime after lifetime? Was it possible that Smith was the one? The one, all those years ago, had been responsible for putting Trask among the ranks of the dead. "Run this by me again," said Sam. "What is it we're supposed to be doing exactly?" Lieutenant Bregman, Kathleen, was hurtling through the corridors of the ziggurat, her head darting from side to side, peeking into the corners, nosing around in the alcoves. We want to find the other guest rooms. They're all supposed to be in the same passage, but Quixotle moved us around after I found the dead guy. Sam tried to keep up with her, physically as well as conceptually. What kind of dead guy was this? I mean, a murdered dead guy, or a guy who just happened to be dead? A smiling dead guy. Forget about it. It doesn't matter right now. They reached another junction, and Kathleen swung off to the right. It's like you said. The guest rooms can tell you everything you need to know about the people staying there, right? Sam sucked her lip. Wait a minute, Kathleen. Are you suggesting... Look, I'm unisick, okay? And yeah, I know we're not the most professional outfit in the world. Oh, I didn't know that, Sam mumbled. But the defenses of this kind of planet are... but the defense of this planet is kind of in our brief. So what I'm saying is we have to have a quick look around the other rooms, and we get the advantage. We can start figuring out exactly what the other BEMs are and why they're here, maybe. Kathleen? Sam grabbed the woman's shoulder, dragging her to a halt. Kathleen looked irritated, but relieved at the same time, as if she were glad she'd been given an excuse to stop running. Listen, half an hour ago, you looked like your head was going to burst if you saw another alien. Now we're trying to break into their hotel rooms? We don't have to break in. There aren't any doors. We? Who is this we? Kathleen gave Sam a suspicious look. Sam tutted at her. I don't mean I'm going to turn out to be a Martian spy or anything. I mean, in case you've forgotten, we're supposed to be rivals here. We're both bidding for the relic, whatever it's meant to be. Bregman, Sam had learned, didn't know what the auction was about either. The Colonel did, but he wasn't saying anything. At least, he wasn't saying anything that made sense. The auction isn't the main thing, it's a question of planetary security. Sam wasn't sure if Kathleen was quoting another Unisic training film or just talking drivel. We're both human. That's what matters here. What? Look, I don't know how to say this. We're standing there in our room, and you said what you said about biodata, and it made sense, okay? I had this idea, and it made sense. Christ, I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I think maybe I'm starting to figure out how to do my job properly. Sam sighed, loudly. Kathleen, you're a seriously messed up individual. Yeah, well, I'm unisick. I'm probably going to end up like the Colonel one day. I might as well practice being a sad loser now. She started sniffing around the passageway, with a faintly bemused look on her face, as if she'd forgotten where she was. Sam tried to distract her. Speaking of the Colonel, don't you think we should tell him what we're doing? He's meditating. It's like hypnosis. You can do serious damage to someone's psyche if you wake them up early. Hey, Sam? Yeah? I think we found something. Kathleen had moved a few paces up the corridor, and now she was standing in front of one of the open doorways, staring into a room on the other side. She had the same vaguely sick look Sam had seen on her face in the cocktail lounge. With less than absolute confidence, Sam skipped to her side and peered through the doorway. Several hundred skulls peered back at her. There was power in the circuits again. Light across the dome of the console room. Homunculate moved around the curve of the wall, pressing his hands against the panels of Marie's inner body. Generally, Homunculate didn't have much of a soft touch. He rarely got more sensitive than being able to tell the difference between ethanol and stain remover. But this was different. This was Marie. He closed his eyes, felt the bastard tear ducts bulging behind the lids again, and wondered in a few bits of his brain that still stayed logical why the ducts hadn't been evolved out of Time Lord biosystems centuries ago. He could feel the life left in Marie's body. traces of sentience buried in the material of the wall. Her mind was in pieces. Somewhere in her depths, Homunculate knew, there'd be the memory record of her last moments as a complete entity. He had to find it, to know what she'd been thinking, to share what she'd experienced even. He knew she'd been attacked, and he knew who'd attacked her, so the information wasn't actually useful as such. It was a personal thing. One way or another, he had to feel he'd been with her when it had happened. Homunculate opened his eyes again, forced himself to look around the console room. The room was intact. Now he'd use the drone clamps to stabilize Marie's architectural core, but the systems were still a mess. Every TARDIS existed on millions of levels, a lot of them too subtle for even the Time Lord mind to perceive. The structure of the console room was only a model of the true heart of the ship, scaled down to fit its user's senses. Marie was sick. You could tell that at a glance, because the access panels lining the walls looked buckled and burnt, as if the room had been gutted by fire. Ridiculous, of course. The fabric of a TARDIS could stand a full-on thermonuclear blast without so much as a scorch mark. The singed panels were there for the sake of appearance, the ship's way of letting Homunculate know something was wrong, as if he needed telling. By the same token, the floor had turned the color of ash, and fractured electrical cables hung limply from the ceiling, tiny blue sparks jumping from break to break. Hovering in the center of the room was a full-length hologram of a single humanoid figure. Getting the hologram projection system back in order had been a nightmare, and Homunculate had almost lost it, literally, when he'd been forced to hammer the circuits into submission with a sonic monkey wrench. Even now, the hologram was pale, bleached, slightly blurry. When Marie had been attacked, her external interface had been ruptured. Homunculate had rectified that before he'd done anything else. He'd programmed the chameleon circuit to reform her outer body, healing over the wound. The hologram was linked to the chameleon circuit and displayed an image of the way Marie looked from on the outside. She was shorter than she had been, blonde, pale-skinned. She wore a dark blue uniform with a silver badge and a dinky little hat. Marie's default setting these days. A year or so ago, Homunculate had taken her to the 20th century London, and while they'd been there, the chameleon circuit had jammed. As a result, Marie had been stuck in the shape of a 1960s British policewoman for several months. Homunculate had fixed the fault, eventually, but whenever Marie had trouble with her internals, the old policewoman body would usually pop back into existence. Homunculate realized he'd closed his eyes again. More salt water under his lids. Stupid. Marie was his companion. Officially assigned to him by the High Council, he was supposed to be an agent of war. Attachment was supposed to be unthinkable. But Marie had been attacked. And whatever Quixotle said, it was obvious, painfully obvious, what had happened. Something had messed around with the structure of space-time. Even the stranger in the velvet jacket had known that. At any other time, Homunculate would have suspected the agents of the enemy, but not here. Not now. After all, everybody knew about the faction. Everybody knew about their rituals, the blood-hungry voodoo rites they used as window dressing to cover up the procedures they'd stolen from the Time Lords. They tore holes in the continuum, put it down to the work of spirits, even acted like they were proud of the damage they did. Bastards. Sadistic, bloodthirsty bastards. Homunculate felt his fingers tighten, only now noticing the way he'd been holding the sonic monkey wrench, weighing it in his palm, gripping it like a club. Before he even knew what he was doing, his thumb had flicked the trigger, deactivating the sonic mechanism, turning the wrench into nothing more than a lump of heavy metal. The doctor was concerned. For someone who had, on many occasions, fooled himself into thinking the universe was his responsibility and his responsibility alone, concern was nothing new. But this was a particularly heavy and ominous kind of concern. the kind you could cut up into slices and serve with chips. He'd been pacing the corridors of the ziggurat for a good hour now, poking his nose into the side passages, going everywhere he thought he could go without triggering the alarm system. There was still no sign of Mr. Quixotle. The man had wanted to talk, but after that business with the TARDIS woman, he'd simply vanished. On his travels around the building, the doctor had talked to the living dead, enjoyed a long conversation with the shift, and even waved to a paradox cultist, surely a first. But he was no wiser about what was going on here. The doctor turned the next corner and practically walked into Mr. Homunculate. Homunculate looked much as he had done in the cocktail lounge, only worse. The doctor beamed when he saw the man, and opened up his arms in what he hoped looked like a gesture of comradeship. In truth, he was spreading his arms to stop Homunculate getting past him in the corridor. "Mr. Homunculate, I presume," the doctor said. "I'm sorry, I don't think we were properly introduced." Homunculate stopped dead. "I've been told you're here on behalf of the Time Lords." "Oh, I've been told you're here on behalf of the Time Lords," the doctor went on. "An ancient and noble race, so I've heard. I wonder if I could talk to you about them for a moment." "Get out of my way," droned Homunculate. The doctor glanced down at the thing on Homunculate's hand. A tool of some kind, evidently covered up in jury-rigged high-tech add-ons. Under any other circumstances, the doctor would have approved of the workmanship. Exactly the kind of thing he might have put together himself, in fact. But Homunculate was holding it in much the same way you'd hold a weapon. The doctor wondered how much damage the Time Lord was capable of doing. He was wiry, not very muscular, but it wasn't wise to underestimate someone on the brink of gibbering neurosis. So the doctor stepped aside, and let Homunculate stomp off around the corridor. "Not very talkative," mused the doctor. Still, perhaps that was for the best. What could he have asked the man anyways? How are things back at home in my future? Puerile. Even if it hadn't been against the law. A war, the shift had told him. Gallifrey was involved in a war. He could have asked Homunculate who the old homeworld was supposed to be fighting, at least. He could have asked what kind of enemy could have pushed the High Council this far enough to forget their non-interventionist policy and get mixed up in Quixotle's auction. It was true, what he said to Sam, about the Time Lords not being able to see their own futures. All part of the mechanisms Rassilon had created when he'd kick-started the Eye of Harmony and installed the interfaces in the first TARDIS units. If the Doctor had slipped between the cracks of the system, stumbled across a piece of forbidden history, then what? What would he do with the foreknowledge? Find out who the Time Lords would be up against, and try to wipe out the enemy forces before they got aggressive? The doctor shuddered. Ugh, talk about a preemptive strike, he muttered. It was possible, though. He could stop the war before it even began. History would bend that far, if he asked it nicely, and it was certainly what the High Council would have wanted him to do. Even the Celestial Intervention Agency would have backed him up this time. But he didn't work for the High Council. He was a free agent. Wasn't he? The doctor shook his head. He had to find Mr. Quixotle. He had to find out what was at stake here, what was on offer at the auction. Then and only then could he start making plans. It wasn't a room. It was a shrine. Bregman didn't know exactly where the dividing line between a room and a shrine, but she was pretty sure this place crossed it, and then some. It was bigger than the other guest rooms, for a start. A great domed area, like the inside of a cathedral, with black girders forming black arches across a black ceiling. The decor was appalling, no other word for it. The walls were inset with circular indentations, and dozens of them, rondels covering every available surface. Set into each of the circles was a skull. So far, Bregman hadn't talked herself into getting too close to any of them, but she guessed the skulls were real. Frozen into the wall, with their jaws locked open. The way the shrine was designed, they looked almost like organic elements, like they'd grown out of the architecture. The floor was paved with metal slabs the color of decay, each one covered in swirls of dirt and lines of rust. At least, Bregman hoped it was rust. There was another possibility, of course. In the center of the dome was a dais, a section of flooring raised a couple of centimeters above the rest of the room, a perfect circle, about a meter from side to side. The lines and scratches were more intense there. Bregman could make out hints of geometric patterns, but nothing definite. Several layers of the rust substance coated the dais, each set of squiggles covering up the last. Said Sam. At this moment in time, it was the most profound thing any human being could possibly have said. I'm not gonna be sick, Bregman croaked, once she'd got her throat back under control. I'm definitely, positively, absolutely not going to be sick. Sam stepped forward, her shoes squealing against the floor of the shrine. There was the hell of an echo in there. Well, I think we can make some pretty good guesses about who this belongs to. Uh-huh. The two bat masks. Faction something. A paradox. Sam started snuffling around the edges of the shrine, looking curious. Curious, thought Bregman. Not completely revolted. Worrying, that. The girl was young enough to be in high school, but she acted like a post-grad archaeology student hanging around her first dig, wading through the old bones with eyes wide open and her tongue hanging out. Probably the way the doctor had trained her. It's bigger than all the other rooms, Sam pointed out. Yeah, I kind of noticed. There aren't any torches. The other rooms have got torches, whatever the furniture's like. Sam nodded towards the nearest wall. There, planted between the gaping rondels, was a vertical strip that looked a lot like a neon tube. There were a lot of them around the shrine, filling the air with a queasy, blue-tinted light. The atmosphere feels different, too, and I might be wrong about this, but I think the doorway's at a funny angle. Bregman felt like screaming, Enough! Okay, what's your point? I don't think this room's part of the building at all. I think it's kind of materialized here. Sam crossed the floor again, giving the dais a wide berth. She was heading for another opening, Bregman realized, the archway set into the deeper wall on the far side of the dome. See? Another way out. I bet you any money you like, it goes deeper into the ship. Ship? Bregman queried. Sam stopped in the doorway. She slipped her hand into the back pocket of her jeans, although it looked to Bregman like an automatic movement, like she didn't really know what she was doing. For the first time, Bregman noticed a big lump of fabric there. A faction paradox, Sam was saying. Didn't that man, Homunculate, is that his name? Didn't he say something about the faction nicking their technology off the Time Lords? Oh, hell. Sam fished out the small paperback book out of her pocket. From the other side of the room, Bregman could see the words Genetic Politics Beyond the Something or Other on the cover. Sam was staring at the book as though she'd just pulled a live mackerel out of her pants. I thought I left this, she began, then trailed off. Whatever. The doctor's magic pockets must be infectious. She started flicking through the book, finally stopping at a page near the end. She mumbled something Bregman didn't quite catch, but it sounded like, I wonder if a fraction hose how to build a TARDIS. It was 7:44, and he was starting to think about letting the sun set over the... It was 17 hours 44 minutes when he was starting to think about letting the sun set over the unthinkable city, that Mr. Quixottle's luck ran out, and he met up with the doctor. Really, he should have confronted the Time Lord as soon as he'd got the chance, but quite frankly, Quixotle didn't have the nerve to go through with that kind of full-scale confrontation. So he'd been scurrying around the ziggurat like a headless cockroach for the last hour or so, finding things to do around the passageway, little loose ends to tie up before the auction, anything to put off the inevitable. Finally, he made the mistake of leaving the high security section on the second level and taking the staircase back to the ground floor. The doctor was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. That was the way it seemed to Quixotle, anyhow. The meeting was probably accidental, but the doctor had a nasty habit of making everything look like he did it pre-planned. "At last!" the doctor said, clapping his hands together. Just my luck, thought Quixotle. He's in one of his self-righteous regenerations. Quixotle froze on the stairs, giving himself the advantage of height, if nothing else. Yeah. Hi, Doctor. Listen, I'm a bit busy right now." "So I see," interrupted the doctor. Mr. Quixotle wondered if anyone around here would ever let him finish the sentence. The Time Lords, faction paradox, the living dead, quite an assortment. "Business is business, Doctor. Can't begrudge a man for trying to make a decent living, can you?" The doctor looked suspicious. "And you know who I am as well. Have we met before?" Well, Quixotle. That's not your real name. How do you know?" "Because Quixotle is what they called the god of ludicrous profit margins on Globulus. Quite egocentric of you, I'd have thought." He furrowed his forehead. "We've met before. I know we have. I'm not sure you always had that face, though. I can't quite put my finger on what it is about you." "Oh, well, never mind that now, yeah?" Quixotle realized he was backing away up the stairs. The doctor was advancing accordingly, matching him step for step. "Look, Doctor, you know what it's like. I've got enough on my hands, you know, what with having to stop the bidders, tearing each other to bits and all. Really, I really don't think they're going to be too happy about someone like you walking around the place, no offense meant." The doctor took offense anyway. "Why? Do I have some kind of reputation?" That's putting it mildly, thought Mr. Quixotle. "You're making things a bit more, complicated, that's all. Why don't you go away and leave us to it, yeah? I mean, it's not like we're threatening the planet or anything." "What are you doing here, Quixotle?" All of a sudden, Quixotle noticed the doctor's eyes. The way they were blazing, a brilliant hypnotic blue. He got the impression the doctor had been practicing his stare all day and had only just managed to get it right. "I don't know what you mean, Doctor. Trust me. It's an auction. So what are you auctioning? Something very valuable, I should think, if the Time Lords are involved. Not a work of art, I'd guess. A weapon." The doctor kept on advancing. Mr. Quixotle kept retreating. He got the horrible feeling he was going to run out of steps pretty soon. "Well, yeah, the Time Lords think it's a weapon." "They think it's a weapon?" "It's the codes. The biodata codes." "Go on." "The body's biodata. There's something in there they think they can use to win their war. I don't know. That's what that's what Homunculate told me." The doctor narrowed his eyes, but didn't blink. "A body? That's what this relic of yours is. You're auctioning off a body." Mr. Quixotle nodded dumbly, and then he stumbled backwards, his legs trying to find the next step up, and discovering there wasn't one. He thumped down on his backside at the top of the stairs. The doctor stood over him, nodding thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Faction Paradox are obsessed with biodata. Their rituals run on it. But to go to all this trouble, it must be the body of someone quite important, someone with a reputation, someone with unique elements in their biological profile." "Well, yeah. Who, Quixotle? Whose body is it? Look, I know you're upset. Whose body?" Again, that stare. Solid blue. Quixotle swallowed, really, really hard.
Yours,
He squeaked.
sorry.
The faction story. Smithman's Town, Dronid, local year 15,414. The dreams were getting worse. Or rather, the dream was getting worse. It was the same each time, and Cousin Sanjura couldn't remember dreaming of anything else since he'd been assigned to the mission. It didn't come every night, but whenever it came, the details were clearer, the colors were brighter, and the pain was sharper. In the dream, Sanjura was a boy again, lying in his bed, in his room at the family orphanage, in the hills on the other side of the capital. The room was dark, but Sanjura felt sure it had the same bleached walls and arched windows in his room as his room in the mission, as if his real surroundings were trying to overwrite the architecture of his dream. He felt rough, sweat-hardened blankets over his body, rubbing against his bare skin, his skinny fingers pulling the material up over his nose and mouth. He was 8 years old, and he was afraid. Because there was someone else in the room. The first time he'd had the dream, he'd thought the figure had been dressed all in black, but now he was beginning to realize its robes were a deep, dirty red. The figure didn't have a face, not a proper one. There was a skull on top of its neck, the bone features of an animal young Sanjura couldn't recognize. There was a patch of cold under Sanjira's legs. Under Sanjira's legs. Urine across the undersheet. The skull-faced man stepped forward towards the bed, bringing with it the scent of leather and dead skin. A silvery scar, a shape Sanjira had never been able to identify, opened up among the folds of its gown. Then, as always, there was pain. Young Sanjira cried out, and old Sanjira in his bed at the mission cried out along with him. When Sanjira awoke, there was light in the room. A sick throbbing under his ribs. Ghost pain. Worse than usual. His eyes flickered across the ceiling above him, tracing the filthy black cracks from one side of the room to the other, finally focusing on the space at the end of the bed. The ceremony mask was there, as ever, perched on its little wooden stand. The face of the creature in the dream, of course. Strange. The 8-year-old Sanjira in the dream never recognized the mask, even though old Sanjira woke up with it, staring him in the face every day of his life. But then Sanjira mused, I wouldn't have known what a ceremony mask looked like when I was 8. The family never showed its artifacts, its fetishes, to the children. He'd been 34 when his own mask had been presented to him, when he'd risen from little brother to cousin. Sanjira crawled out of the bed, reached for his day robe, and folded it around his body, trying to ignore the sense of revulsion he felt when he saw his own bloodless, withered limbs slipping into the sleeves. 50 years old, looking 80 at least. The other members of the family at the mission talked about that, behind his back. They said he'd made a pact with bad spirits, and this was the price he'd paid. He would have laughed if he'd had the strength. The others were different. They were young, and they'd been brought to Dronid from worlds as far apart as Lerma and Salastopus. But Sanjira had been born and raised here, and he knew the truth of it. There were things in the air on Dronid, things the local never talked about. They took you apart, hour by hour, year by year. They bit chunks out of your life, ate away at your skin and bones. The legacy of the Time Lords, thought Sanjira. They'd done so much to this planet. So much damage. Cousin? Sanjira didn't bother to turn. He knew what he'd see. Little sister Justine, wearing the same outfit day in, day out. The black velvet dress she'd brought from Earth, when the family had recruited her. She'd be hovering in the doorway of Sanjira's room, her head bowed respectfully. He wondered if she'd spend the rest of her life like that. He imagined her as an old woman, worn to nothing by Dronid, her red hair turned grey, performing the same old duties decade after decade. Senjira mumbled the earliest prayer. Justine gave all the correct responses. She was only 17, Senjira remembered, still young enough to take the spirits at face value. There is news, cousin, Justine said, once the formalities were over. Little brother Coleman is back from the city. He's been watching the corporation for us. Senjira moved across to one of the windows, as he did every morning. It was a hole in the wall, nothing more. No weather on Dronid these days. No wind or rain. No need for glass. Outside, on the street behind the mission, there was nothing but red dust and crumbling stonework. A handful of young men lurked among the ruins on the other side of the street, doing their best to look macho and dangerous whenever anybody wandered past. And? Senjira prompted. Coleman believes the corporation has found the relic, Justine went on. There was a touch of excitement in her voice, which she wasn't hiding quite well enough. Under the wreckage of the city centre, hidden in an underground bunker, he says. Senjira turned to her, at last. The little sister's head was still bowed. A relic? What sort of relic? The little brother wasn't certain, cousin. He described it as a coffin, though he couldn't examine it closely, not without the corporation noticing him. They say the bunker's been there since the cataclysm. Senjira coughed a chuckle out of his throat. Cataclysm. So dramatic, the New Bloods. The Time Lords had fought the first battle of their war on Dronid half a century ago. The natives never spoke of it, but the off-worlders liked to think of it as a war in heaven, all hellfire and thunder. Of course, Senjira knew better. It wasn't the planet that had destroyed the cities. It wasn't the battle that had sucked the life out of the planet. The Time Lords had done that after the battle had ended, in a desperate attempt to cover their tracks. Gallifrey liked to keep its secrets. Is it a Time Lord artifact? Senjira queried. Little Sister Justine wrinkled her nose. The little brother wasn't sure. He acted rather rashly. Explain. He contacted some of the family's allies in the city. They agreed to attack the corporation's stronghouse there. Justine sniffed the air as she spoke. Coleman thought he believed the relic might be of some importance, cousin. A Time Lord weapon, perhaps, left over from the cataclysm. The little brother should have consulted me first, as he well must know. Senjira tried to sound angry, but the effort made him feel very, very tired. Nevertheless, I should like to examine this item at first hand, and the smell that's troubling you, little sister, is my own urine. I've wet my bed. Does that bother you? Justine kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her face too pale to blush, though. No, Cousin Senjira. Good. We shouldn't let these small things worry us. Now, leave me. I need to dress. It took them the best part of the day to reach the city from Smithmanstown. The family owned an automobile, one of the only few that had survived the cataclysm, although the bodywork had been eaten away by the clockwork bacteria the Time Lords had introduced to the planet. Its engine pumped thick black smoke into the atmosphere wherever it went. There were no roads connecting the town anymore, so the machine trundled over the mounds of debris that had once been the suburbs, stopping in shanty towns whenever Justine became travel-sick. They passed fewer and fewer people as they drove into the city center. The place was poisonous, and everyone knew it. You just didn't live there, unless you could afford the alien medical equipment the corporation peddled. The Stronghouse, when they reached it, turned out to be a rotting 3-story building that had once been an administration office. Apt, Senjira decided. The cults and the criminal groups were the only government Dronid had left. The corporation had made its home in the capital, while Faction Paradox was busy trying to rebuild its power base in the smaller towns around it. Briefly, Sanjira wondered if the planet was really worth fighting for, but he put the thought out of his mind. On the inside, the building wasn't much different to the mission. All bleached walls and dirty cracks. Evidently, the attack on the strong house had finished some time ago. There were bodies in the foyer, fallen corporation security guards, half a dozen or so arranged in a messy blood-flecked heap by the doorway. Some of the family's city allies hovered in the shadows at the edges of the room, giggling among themselves and eyeing up Justine as she walked past them. All men, Sanjira noted. Many of them had teeth sharpened to points. At least Sanjira hoped they'd been sharpened. He certainly hadn't heard of the city atmosphere causing DNA mutations like that. Most were dressed in suits, the kind that had been popular among the upwardly mobile underclasses before the Time Lords had arrived, with gold medallions around their scrawny necks. The usual tribal identifiers, thought Sanjira. Their forefathers had probably belonged to the ghetto gangs before the cities had fallen. They'd all be dead by 30. Still, if they made useful allies, so much the better. It was good to have disposable people on your side. They found the relic in an office, which Sanjira assumed had belonged to the Stronghouse's commander-in-chief while he'd been alive. The room was, like in all others, white-walled and grubby, but there were no windows, only light coming from the paraffin lamp nailed to the ceiling. In the center of the office was a desk, and perched on the desk, more than a little precariously, was a casket. It was metallic, with two symbols Sanjira didn't recognize etched into its lid, and it pulsed with a soft silver light, which the cousin guessed would probably be hypnotic if you stared at it for long enough. One of the faction's allies slouched in the chair near the desk, his squinty eyes searching the room for something to rest his feet on. Two of his underlings hovered nearby, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Got your box," the leader said when Sanjira stepped forward. The man's face was long, his features were lumpy, and he dribbled as he spoke. Sanjira presumed some sort of genetic deformity was involved. The cousin moved to inspect the casket. The two thugs shuffled towards him, doing their best to look menacing. There was something not quite right about their eyes, Sanjira noticed. Possibly it was the drugs they were taking. "Did I say you could touch it?" drooled the leader. Sanjira attempted to look pious. "Do I take it you're going to ask for remuneration?" The leader sniggered like a moron. He probably was a moron, though, so the cousin couldn't fault him for that. "Costs us lots to get into this place. Guns, ammo, organizational costs. Follow?" Frankly, Sanjira was amazed he could say words like organizational without slobbering. "What do you want?" he asked. "Want you to look into something. Want your help. Use those special bug eyes you got." "Look into what, precisely?" The man grinned a saw-toothed grin. "Future. Our future. Corporations starting to notice us, follow. Ambushes. Setups. They say either you work with us or you don't work. We want to know how they're tooled up. We want where they're going to be moving in when they're thinking of playing bad little tricks on us. Don't want to get snuck up on. Don't want to work for them. Don't want to work for anyone." "I think we can come to some arrangement," Sanjira said. Justine looked horrified, but she didn't speak. "Of course, I'll need to inspect the casket before I can agree to anything," he added. The leader glanced at his men. Then he shrugged and got to his feet. "You can look. Don't get too excited, heh? and with another nasty little gurgle, the man sauntered out of the office, his 2 lapdogs in tow. Justine waited until they were out of earshot before she spoke. "Cousin, you can't. That is, with respect." Sanjura approached the casket and ran his fingers across the lid. Yes, as he thought. A coffin. Time Lord design. "Is there a problem, little sister? Perhaps you don't think we should do deals with our allies?" Justine bowed her head. "Cousin, he wants us to use the techniques for his own benefit. The spirits... Such a thing would be disrespectful, surely." "It's wise to keep one's allies happy, little sister. But the spirits are a convenience. Their prime function is to be useful, not to be worshipped, which is the greater weapon? The grandfather himself, or the awe that people have for him?" Cousin, forgive me. I don't understand." Justine didn't seem to know where to look. Obviously, she decided her best option was to change the subject, because she asked, "The relic, is it what you expected?" "Yes. A body. Almost certainly a Time Lord." "Is his biomass useful?" Sanjura patted the lid of the casket. "We have all the Gallifreyan data we could possibly need. A corpse is of no value to us. We have no control over the dead, even if we have their biodata. That's the way of the Celestis, not the way of the family." Little Sister Justine looked puzzled. "Forgive me, cousin. If that's true, why do you want to bargain for the casket?" "Because the dead must be given their due rights. Even the dead of Gallifrey. Besides which, I want to make our allies feel they're getting something for nothing. If they defect to the corporation, Dronid will never be ours." He thought about that for a moment. "What's left of Dronid will never be ours," he corrected himself. They performed the ritual back at the mission. In the chambers of the family shrine, Cousin Sanjira let Justine speak the parting prayer. When the spirits latched onto the casket and pulled it away through the folds of space-time, Little Sister actually jumped. She'd never been responsible for a dematerialization before, Sanjira remembered. He tried not to smile at the look on her face. She'd performed the rite well, though. One day, when she realized the true significance of the spirits, she'd make a good cousin, perhaps even a good mother. They watched the progress of the casket on one of the shrine's monitors, watched it tumbling away through the vortex, heading towards whatever destination the spirits had chosen for it. Justine, as was traditional, prayed the body might cause as much damage to causality as possible. Once the image had faded from the monitors, Sanjira tried to explain why it was so important to give the enemies of the family the proper last rites. Ceremony was the key, he told her. When she understood that, she'd understand the spirits. He knew she'd get it one day. The dream was different that night. Cousin Sanjira was an old man, not a boy. He was wearing his family robes, stained with the spilt biomass of a dozen ceremonies, the mask over his face making him cough and wheeze. He moved through a building full of beds, a sleeping child tucked into each and every one. Alarmingly, there was a knife in his hand. He recognized it as the ceremonial blade from the mission, the one he and Justine had just used to draw blood for the dematerialization rite. A silhouette slipped out of a darkened corner and blocked the doorway ahead of Sanjira, a living wall of dried blood and black muscle. The apparition had one arm, although the shadow it cast had two. Sanjira tried to draw another breath, but the air turned to smoke in his lungs. The grandfather had one arm, the family legends claimed. He'd cut the other one off himself to remove the tattoo the Time Lords had branded him with. Could it really be? "I am not the grandfather," the silhouette said. "Only a messenger." Sanjira tried to speak. He felt like falling to his knees, like screaming, like running. He remembered what he'd said to Justine about the spirits. Heresy, even if it happened to be true. Please, he thought, Please, no. I meant no disrespect, but Justine is so young, she doesn't realize. That isn't the problem, said the messenger. Its voice was smooth but soft, no louder than a hiss. It's about the body. The body? Sanjira managed to rasp. Oh, yes. What did you do, cousin? What did you throw away? The spirits are distressed. The grandfather is displeased. I performed the proper rites, Sanjira protested, wheezing with every syllable. He tried to prise off the mask, but it wouldn't budge. The silhouette laughed, and its shadow laughed with it. Oh, idiot boy. Through biodata we become strong. This is our way. The relic was handed to you on a plate, and you gave it up to the vortex. Its will is too strong for the spirits to steer its passage. The relic is lost to us now. It was a dead body, Sanjira coughed. Dead! Its biodata was of no use! A legend never dies, cousin. You should know that. A legend? Sanjira clawed at the mask and felt one of his fingernails break against the bone. Then the body, who? The one-armed shape leaned forward and whispered in cousin Sanjira's ear. It whispered the name of the dead Time Lord, told the cousin the true nature of the body in the box. The whispers echoed inside the mask until the whole world seemed to be made out of words. No! Sanjira howled. The silhouette shrank back. Yes, cousin, yes. You see? The grandfather's pleasure was to possess the biodata, to grow from its strength. Yet you threw the body away without looking beneath its skin. Is there any sin worse than this? Then there's to be a punishment? The grandfather's messenger didn't speak. It moved aside, melding with the shadows around it, letting Sanjira pass. The cousin stepped forward, his legs moving of their own accord. The room ahead was his own room, in the orphanage. In front of him there was a bed, and in the bed lay an 8-year-old boy. Cousin Sanjira heard the humming of the shrine in his ears, and he knew the spirits had brought him here. For the briefest of moments, Sanjira saw himself as the boy saw him, a figure in a blood-tainted robe, his face the skull of a bat. The cousin moved to the side of the bed and raised the knife, a scar of silver unfolding from his gown. This was his punishment, then. Cousin Sanjira, aged 50, stabbed the boy clean through the heart. Young Sanjira, aged 8, cried out once and died. But if young Sanjira died, then cousin Sanjira had never existed, which meant he couldn't have killed the boy, which meant he didn't exist, which meant he could have killed the boy, which meant he never existed, which meant he couldn't have killed the boy, which meant he didn't exist, which meant cousin Sanjira murdered the child and was himself murdered again and again. He felt his life being disassembled and reassembled, disassembled and reassembled, disassembled and reassembled, until his timeline swallowed its own tail, and there was nothing left of him but divine and perfect paradox. Hell yeah. 6. The Body Snatchers. Reprise. The black ship re-entered normal space at about 1,000 kilometers above the surface of the Earth, on the very fringes of the planet's ionosphere. Its arrival sent shockwaves through the psychic aura of the entire Eastern Hemisphere, causing people across India and Malaysia to see disturbing patterns in the static of their TV sets, and forcing images of impossible machines into the minds of Asia's leading research scientists. For weeks after, the continent's New Agers would experience visions of bizarre planets made entirely out of crystal, but put it all down to something in the water. The ship's scanning mechanisms surveyed the island that had once been called Borneo, finding the expected tachyon disturbances at the heart of the bioengineered rainforest. In the control section of the vehicle, a two-pronged hand began wiring invite card into the navigational banks, the pincers moving with surprising grace and precision. A few minutes later, the vessel was brought into phase with Quixotl's Brigadoon circuit, and the unthinkable city became visible to the ship's single occupant. Non-organic sensory systems monitored the building with a sensation that might, if the observer had been human, been called excitement. The black ship promptly dropped into Earth's gravity well. Sam peered along the corridor, but the decor was the same as far as the eye could see. Skulls, skulls, and more skulls. She looked over her shoulder. Behind her, in the main part of the shrine, Kathleen was wandering around the raised section of the floor, looking completely thrown by the whole thing. Sam wondered whether there was some kind of reassurance she could have been giving the woman. Then she remembered that Kathleen was about a decade older than she was. An officer with an international military organization, for God's sake. Sam had made a mental note to ask the lieutenant what UNISIC stood for, the next time they had a moment to themselves. She turned her attention back to the passage around her. The faction's ship was a lot like the TARDIS, but more open plan. The TARDIS was designed as a vehicle, with all the rooms and corridors stuffed into one handy little box, but the shrine was more like a set of rooms, capable of sliding into other people's architecture as it saw fit, a location rather than an object. The passage ahead was lined with blue lighting strips and dark ionic columns, and the floor coated with muddy scratches and swirls. Sam crouched down to inspect the markings. The darker lines looked like dried blood, but if it was real human bean juice, a hell of a lot of it had been spilled here. Maybe the ship ran on the stuff like in the stories that the doctor... Maybe the ship ran on the stuff like the stories the doctor had told her about the great vampires. Maybe the skulls were the remains of the people the shrine had consumed. Ugh. Hell, said Kathleen. Sam turned and stood. Back in the shrine, Kathleen was standing frozen by the dais, staring at a second figure near the entrance. Before she'd even identified the shape, Sam had thrown herself against the wall of the passage, squeezing herself between two of the columns. There wasn't much light here, she reasoned, so she probably wasn't visible from the shrine. She felt something press into her back, presumably the jawbone of one of the skulls. There was a vibration running through the skull, a humming of power. Sam held her breath. From the shrine, she could hear the sound of Kathleen's feet skittering across the floor, and something else. Breathing. Heavy breathing. Whoever had arrived in the shrine, Sam concluded, was wearing a mask. "Don't touch me," Kathleen said. More skittering. "I got lost, okay? Please. I'm sorry. I really, really don't want to be here." The breathing stopped, Sam guessed. The mask had come off. "I don't want to be here!" Kathleen yelled. Against Sam's back, the skulls hummed a little more loudly, as if the ship was about to be fed. The doctor dragged Mr. Quixotl along the corridor. His fingers twisted around the man's earlobe. Quixotl's legs were a little on the short side, so he practically had to skip down the tunnel to keep up with the doctor. As he bounced from leg to leg, he made the occasional grunt of protest, but so far he hadn't bothered resisting. "Now, let's try to be reasonable about this, okay?" Quixotl gurgled, as the doctor hauled him around the corridor. "I can see you're, upset, but, there's no need to get nasty." "Nasty?" The doctor let go of his ear, then watched as Quixotl lost his balance, bounced off the wall, and fell onto his backside. "You're selling off my own mortal remains, and you don't want me to get nasty?" Quixotl rubbed the bruised parts of his anatomy, but didn't get up. "Business is business," he muttered. The doctor tried to remember the last time he'd been angry. Really, really angry. He couldn't. He'd been indignant, yes, and he'd often been a little snappish since he'd acquired this body, The same way you could get a little snappish when you bought a new pair of shoes and found out they didn't quite fit properly. But this was the first time he'd been angry in quite a while. Really, he was surprised how easy it seemed. Losing his temper seemed a much simpler process than it had done, say, half a decade ago. Another quirk of a new personality, he guessed. It was 3.5 years old, but he still hadn't looked in all the corners. So much in his head these days, it could take him centuries to sort it all out. He took a deep breath. "Why, Quixotle?" he said. "Why?" The man shrugged. "It's a valuable piece of biomass. Listen, if it's any consolation, there was a rigorous screening program, right? Lots of races wanted your your earthly remnants, so they could gloat a bit. Everyone wants your head on a stick. I only invited the ones who had, a special use for it." It wasn't much of a consolation, really. The doctor was starting to feel like a can of dog food. "Then it's true what you told me before. The Time Lords want it for some kind of weapon." "Oh yeah, they're desperate. Now some of the Celestis are going over the other side. The war's going to hell in a handbasket." "Shh! Shh!" The doctor closed his eyes and put his hands over his ears. "I don't want to hear it. I don't want to know anything about the future." But then, knowing about the future was inevitable, wasn't it? To some degree, anyway. They were talking about his body, which meant his future was already lying here, lying in a coffin box somewhere in the ziggurat. So, this was it. His wake. A bunch of backstabbing, four-dimensional parasites, all trying to get their hands on whatever was left of his flesh and blood. He remembered that time on Necros, when he'd stumbled across his own tombstone. It had been a fake, of course. An elaborate practical joke, but it had set him thinking. Wondering whose face he'd be wearing when he was lowered into the ground. Wondering whether he'd make it to the end of the 12th regeneration. He could look, if he wanted. Oh, good grief, no. He opened his eyes. "Are you sure it's me?" he asked. Down on the floor, Quixotle nodded. "Yep. Listen, if it's help, you're not going to snuff it until after—" "Quixotle! Sorry. What I mean is, you're sure it isn't a forgery, a clone, a simulacrum? You think I couldn't spot a clone, with all the biotech I've got around here? Anyhow, a clone wouldn't have the bits of biodata you've picked up over the years. It'd only have the inbuilt genetic stuff. Otherwise, I'd be selling a copy to everyone here. Sorry, Doctor. My condolences and everything." "It's underneath us," the doctor murmured. "Down in the catacombs under the ziggurat. The voice I heard. It's a telepathic trace. That's why I didn't want to talk to me. Because I knew I couldn't be allowed to communicate with myself, not from beyond the grave." A sudden thought struck him. "Are you sure I'm dead?" Quixotle laughed, then realized it was in bad taste, and pretended he'd been clearing his throat. Yeah, pretty sure. "But I'm still telepathically active." I know. Time Lords are supposed to be active after death, residual psychic power and so forth. But to be a good transmitter, maybe I'm feigning death. Maybe it's something to do with my respiratory bypass system. I've done it before." "You're hyperactive even as a corpse, Doctor. That's why you're worth so much, yeah?" Corpse. The doctor shuddered, but not visibly. Did the man really have to use that word? Body he could deal with. Cadaver, even. But corpse? "Where's the control center of this city?" he growled. Even he was amazed at how threatening he sounded. Quixotle looked suitably startled. "It's, on the next level down. But you can't go there." "The dead can go anywhere." The doctor raised his eyes to the ceiling. "And I said I didn't believe in ghosts," he said, addressing any major supernatural powers who might have been passing by. At least the man looked human. When he'd crept into the shrine, he'd been wearing the bat skull over his face, but now the mask was off. He was, Bregman judged, even younger than Cousin Justine had been. His skin was rough, tanned, pockmarked, pulled so tightly across his face that he seemed almost as skeletal as his headgear. He had dark hair, tied into a ponytail at the back of the head, and there was a small scar across his forehead. Bregman guessed it was self-inflicted. She'd remember the videocast she'd seen of the urban tribes in Little Sao Paulo on the west end of the Canadian Fed. Dropouts who'd identified each other by the scars they wore. The man, little brother something, looked just like one of the gang runners, Brazilian features and all. Only his eyes didn't fit the stereotype. Pale blue. Aryan blue. Contacts, maybe. Little brother kept moving forward. Bregman kept backing away. He was taller than she was, and probably combat trained. His clothes weren't ideal for action. He looked really uncomfortable in that suit. But then Bregman's body wasn't ideal for action either. "I don't want to be here," she squawked. Then her heel caught against something on the floor behind her, and she tumbled backwards. After a few moments, Bregman found herself staring up at the pitch-black ceiling of the shrine. Her backside ached more than her backbone, so at least it had been a good fall. There was a wet patch under her hand, as if she'd fallen into a puddle. The face of the faction cultist materialized above her head. A smile stretched itself across his lips. The smile made his mouth look like another ceremonial scar. "You on the slab," he drawled. Bregman twisted her head to one side. She realized she was lying on the dais center of the chamber. From here she could make out the details of the rust patterns, geometric figures that looked as though they'd leaked straight out of someone's veins. She figured out why her hand was wet, at least. "Blood," she said. "No blood," the little brother told her, the smile wound opening up a little. "Biomass. We take that from one of the corporation. Took a whole day, cutting that son of a bitch open." "Oh, God," Bregman croaked. The Time Lord, homunculate, had said something about faction paradox being a voodoo cult. Voodoo was illegal in most parts of the world these days, after what had happened in Haiti in the 40s, and most of what Bregman knew came from old schlock movies. Voodoo rituals involved the use of biological matter. Everybody knew that. You used people's hair and toenail clippings to cast spells against them. You used blood to activate the magic. That was it. The shrine was alive. Bregman had read the tech reports. She knew all about the living technology the aliens used. The organic ships of the Zygons, the thinker weapons of the Salatians. The shrine was a ship with a mind of its own. If human beings had built a place like this, it would have been full of computer banks and navigational systems, but the faction did things differently. The only way you could communicate with the shrine was through blood rituals, and Bregman was lying on top of the control panel. Sacrifice a chicken, and you're on your way. "I don't want to be here," Bregman hollered. "It was a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." "You are here, unisick bitch. This our shrine. You don't come here. Just me, my cousin, and the spirits. Anyone else, that's sacrilege." He didn't sound like he was outraged by the blasphemy, though. He sounded like it thought it was all a big joke. Bregman decided to chance her arm. Oh, great. Hell of an expression to think of at a time like this. "What do you want?" The little brother stopped smiling. Reached into the top pocket of his jacket. "Satisfaction," he said. "You want to keep the spirits happy, is that it?" "Spirits? You think I'm gonna be a witch doctor, like Tarzan? You think I'm gonna wave my unga-bunga stick at you, turn you into a dog? You already a dog, uni bitch." He took his hand out of his pocket. Bregman saw that there was something attached to it. It looked a lot like a knuckle duster, but much more intricate, the product of a higher technology. There was a tiny glass vial connected to each finger. Bregman watched, spines extended from the vials, needles, syringes maybe, 4 of them in all. The little brother inspected the device and then turned to Bregman. "We want something from you," he said. "Then I let you run, okay?" Colonel Joseph Armitage Cortez was getting close to Cloud 9. He knew this for a fact because he'd been careful to count the clouds he'd passed. The advantage of the military mind, he reasoned. Just as you were going to have an out-of-body experience, just because you were going to have an out-of-body experience, that was no excuse for sloppiness. He'd been ascending the various levels of existence for about half an hour now, all while meditating on the events of the auction. As he passed Cloud 7, he was assailed by false angels, tiny white-winged goblins with faces stolen from other representatives in the ziggurat. One of the creatures, adopting the features of the man in the green velvet jacket, twittered around the colonel's head. "Sergeant Colonel Cortez," he explained. "Still reading up on Zen Buddhism?" "I don't know you," Cortez said. "Oh, I'm sure you do," the man said. "Don't you remember Saskatoon?" "Cortez!" It was another of the angels. It looked like Mr. Quixote, but it sounded more like General Chaiki. "Don't you know your duty, Colonel? There's a traitor in our midst. The threat to the security of Earth. Deal with him at once." 2 other angels, skeletal bats with dove's feathers stuck to their wings, fluttered past. "The spirits are with us," one announced joyously, "but we had to capture those thermocistern bombs, not destroy them." "Si," affirmed the other. The strange is truther than you think," said Mr. Homunculate. "The schoolgirl is not what she seems." "But sometimes my arms bend back," added one particularly angelic angel with an unfolding face. "Who would live in a body like this?" asked the doctor. Doctor. Where had he come from? Cortez had decided the angels had probably sent a distraction by the infernal forces of creation, so he was glad to find himself drifting out of their reach. But Cloud 8 was next, and if anything, it was going to be even worse. The realm of dreams, Cortez knew, full of broken images, random associations. "There's something you have to know," said the doctor. The spirit of Colonel Cortez uttered the strongest curse mantra he knew. The doctor, again. The memory of the man had followed him up from Cloud 7. The doctor was different to the way the colonel remembered him, taller and older. The details were unclear, though, as if the Time Lord was wearing a shroud over his head. "We are all of us living inside the bottle," the doctor explained, while worms of the astral plane began eating away his flesh. "And one day the bottle will break. Then all the worlds will be one. The inside will meet the outside." "But what about the auction?" asked Cortez. The doctor considered this. "I don't know. What have you got to offer?" Cortez puffed out his chest, or at least the part of his higher life essence that was currently pretending to be his chest. "I'm not concerned about my bid, Doctor. It's the other representatives I'm thinking of." The doctor nodded. His shroud bobbed up and down. "For the record, most of them will be offering information, technical data, weapons specifications." "Is that all?" Cortez felt a swelling of pride in his pseudo-chest. "Then I have no reason for concern. What I have to offer Mr. Quixote's greater than any material word." "Really? What's that?" "What's up on Cloud 9, Cortez replied. He very nearly smiled when he said it. After a while, Cousin Justine had grown tired of squinting at the cracks in the walls, so she'd searched the rooms of the ziggurat for a better medium of communication, finally finding the newspaper in the anteroom. She opened it to the TV page, which supplied her with a listing of tonight's programs on the Bornean National Channel. Television, she remembered from Drawned. Fragmented pictures, human faces like her own. bodies full of life, dancing to alien rhythms, fabulous and incomprehensible. 2000 hours. News and weather. 2010, the week in Sport Inc. Intercam Results Service. 2030, evening movie, Harvey, 1950, in Remode 3D, where available. Classic comedy starring James Stewart. Hello again, Cousin Justine. Are you well? You seem distracted. Cousin Justine nodded formally. I'm perfectly fine, Mr. Shift. Thank you. Culture shock? Justine felt herself bite her lip. Is it really so obvious? Only to 2:45. Only to me, I should think. Good. Now, we were discussing the new arrival. You're concerned? 23:05. I'm suspicious. I picked up a few of his notions when he arrived. Did you know he's a Time Lord? Cousin Justine didn't know, and the news surprised her. I understood Mr. Homunculate was here on behalf of Gallifrey. 23:50. He is, which begs the question, where does this interloper come from? One of the New Blood houses? Don't trust him, said a voice. Justine looked up from the newspaper to see an unfamiliar outline stumbling into the anteroom. It was a man, or it had been once. He walked with slow, heavy strides, as if worried his legs might fall off if he moved too fast. Apart from her eyes, all Justine's senses told her there was no one in the room except her and the Shift, at least no one living. The Time Lord. Don't trust him. He killed me. Killed me. You're beautiful, Justine whispered. The man stared at her, without feeling. Justine knew what she just said, and knew how undignified it must have sounded, but it was the simple truth. This man was pure, the way only the dead could be pure. In him, everything the family had taught Cousin Justine to respect was made flesh. Not important, the man said. Listen to me. The Time Lord. He killed me. I know him. I'm sure He didn't get the chance to finish the sentence. A cluster of gangling limbs rushed out of the corridor and into the anteroom, knocking the dead man to one side, and he keeled over, without any kind of complaint. Before Justine could even catch her breath, something was moving towards her face at high speed. She ducked. A blur of silver slapped the air above her head. Homunculate. He'd bolted into the room, moving faster than someone as sickly-looking as him should have been able to move. Cousin Justine saw a snarl on his face, a wedge of metal in his hand. She felt the Shift stumbling around inside her head, looking for some way of communicating with her, but there was no way for it to manifest itself. All Justine could see was Homunculate, a rag bag of expletives and bony limbs, doing his best to smash his weapon into the side of her skull. Sam shouted. Kathleen didn't respond. The lieutenant looked alert, but she seemed to be listening to something else entirely. Sam finally caught up with her in one of the ziggurat's deeper corridors, near a stairway that presumably led to the basement level. Kathleen tried to hurl herself down the steps, but Sam managed to grab her shoulders before she could make it. She pulled Kathleen back into the corridor, where the woman slid to the floor and finally stopped moving, exhausted at last. Sam knelt down by her side. Finding Kathleen hadn't been easy. Sam had stayed hidden in the passage of the faction shrine while little brother Manuele had performed his interrogation in what had sounded like an Americanized South American accent. Finally, there was a noise Sam hadn't recognized. It hadn't sounded nice. Kathleen and Manuele had left the shrine together. Sam had waited a minute or two, then scarpered after them. Out in the corridors of the ziggurat, there'd been no sign of the faction cultist, but after a while, Sam had found Bregman again, hurtling down a torchlit passage into the guts of the building. Bregman's face was pressed against the floor now. Sam tried to get her attention. Kathleen? No reply. Kathleen, what happened? Kathleen, what happened? No reply. Can you hear me? What did he do to you? Instantly, Kathleen's arm shot out from underneath her. Sam blinked. The woman was wearing a long-sleeved shirt, so the limb was bare from the shoulder down, and the marks along her forearm were in plain view. 4 small dots, the color of burnt flesh, like someone had attacked Kathleen with a hole punch. I gave Manueli what he wanted, Kathleen said, flatly. That sounded ominous. And what did he want? Kathleen finally looked up. Not at Sam, though. She was staring into the alcove where the stairway was set. Can you hear him? She said. Startled, Sam looked around, half expecting to see the little brother creeping up on them. There was nobody in sight. He says he can make it stop, Kathleen said. He said there's no need to be afraid. He said he's the one monsters are afraid of. He can make them go away. There's evil in the universe. Some things must be fought. Oh hell, she was really losing it now. Listen to me, Kathleen. You're delirious. I don't know what's been done to you. Sam stopped talking. She knew no one was listening. Kathleen unfolded her limbs and started pulling herself upright. He says I don't have to worry about anything. Not even displacer syndrome. Sam put her hands around the lieutenant's shoulders, more as a gesture of support than to help her up. Displacer syndrome? She queried. Displacer syndrome. Displacer syndrome. Kathleen practically sang the words. Unisonic personnel are 15 times more likely to commit suicide than the average human being. Did you know that? She seemed to be addressing the stairway. Sam shook her head. I'm coming, Kathleen concluded. Then she broke free of Sam's grip and threw herself down the stairs. The doctor hadn't spoken in ages. He'd strolled along the corridor to the security center without a second's hesitation, Quixotle in tow, and nothing had tried to stop him. The defensive systems should have identified him as foreign matter, Quixotle reminded himself, should have ripped him to pieces. Maybe one of the circuits had messed up again. Or maybe the stories about the doctor were true. They said he'd been able to wander through death traps without a scratch while he'd been alive, which kind of contradict the stories of how he died, but there you go. The doctor didn't even stop in his tracks when he saw the full horror of the security center. He headed straight for the master console, and the pick screen obediently unfolded itself from the surface at his touch. Quixotle glanced at one of the tapestries on the far wall, the one depicting the sentient dinosaur sawing heads off of vestigial virgins. The dinosaur's eyes were leering in Quixotle's direction, as if to say, "You've lost the plot, sunshine." The doctor was busy prodding the controls by the time Quixotle reached the console, the pick screen cycling through the schematics of the ziggurat. Eventually, the doctor found a map of the lowest level, and the screen showed him the complex crisscross of traps protecting the relic. The body itself, in its sealed casket, was indicated by a point of solid silver light. The doctor stared at it, and stared, and stared. Quixotle prompted. I don't understand, the doctor muttered. Quixotle looked up at the tapestry again. Even the Vestal virgins were laughing at him now. Why, the doctor went on, why would the Time Lords need my body so badly? Homunculus, an agent of the High Council, he's not here to make sure I get a decent burial. It's like I said, Gallifrey needs your biodata codes. It's the war. The doctor shook his head. What's so special about my biodata? All the Time Lords have the same sort of thing in their biology. I know I've got more practical experience than most, and there's still that little question of my ancestry to be cleared up, but even so... Mr. Quixotle wondered how much he could say without the doctor having a go at him for damaging the delicate web of space-time. All right, it's like this. At the start of the war, Gallifrey lost a lot of stuff, yeah? Most of its secrets got scrubbed by the doctor gave him a warning glance. by the enemy. I mean, I'll tell you this much. Those sods can wipe out information as fast as they can wipe out matter. Most of the Time Lord big guns got taken out. The DMAT gun, the Sash of Rassilon, the works. You know how much the High Council's technology relies on biodata codes, right? Most of the biodata codes went too. The doctor frowned. I am an ex-president of the High Council. I've got all the codes they need. Yep, not just that, Quixotle paused. Listen, I'll try not to give too much stuff away, but between now and the time when you finally, kick the bucket, other stuff happens to you. I mean, you might think you've got a lot of weird bits in your biodata right now, but just wait until the end. Quixotle wiped his brow with the sleeve of his jacket. This had to be the hardest conversation of his life. Your body's got all kinds of secrets stuffed into its biodata, the things the Time Lords have lost, and when I say lost, I mean totally. The doctor considered this for a few moments. They go back in time, get a hold of the information they need before it was destroyed by the enemy. Nope, doesn't work. The enemy's fighting a 4-dimensional war here. The two sides are in a temporal stalemate. They're blocking off whole chunks of history to each other. The doctor looked appalled. Then the enemy must know as much about temporal mechanics as the Time Lords. I don't think I wanted to know that. Anyhow, Gallifrey's in touch with its own past, but technically, you're not part of Gallifrey's past. Not anymore. You're a renegade. You're an independent. Too tricky to put a time blockade on. Besides, your body's more powerful than anyone else's, they'd reckon. The doctor held up his hand, motioning Quixotle to stop talking. All right, I don't want to know how the war starts, but I don't want to know who the enemy is. Will be. But can you tell me one more thing? Who are the Celestis? Quixotle looked around the chamber. He wasn't sure why. In case there were any spies hanging around in the corridors, I assumed. He supposed. The Celestis are Time Lords, he said. The ones who saw the war coming. I mean, according to Homunculate, the High Council got taken by surprise when it all started. They got that gizmo on Gallifrey for predicting the future. The Matrix, the doctor said. Quixotle nodded. Actually, he'd known full well what it was called, but he didn't want to look like he knew too much. Yeah, that. But the Matrix only makes guesses, right? Because the Time Lords aren't allowed to peek into the future, not properly. And anyway, the enemy are time-active, so the Matrix didn't see 'em coming. Something to do with non-linearity. But get this. A bunch of high-ranking Time Lords outside of the High Council still figured out the war was going to happen, don't ask me how. And they got scared, because, if the enemy kill you, they don't just kill you. They make sure you never existed in the first place. So this bunch of Time Lords decided to get out the only way they could. The doctor's attention was fixed on him now. Which was a good job, Quixotle realized, because it meant he hadn't noticed the way the pic screen had changed. It now displayed a simple 2D image of the ziggurat roof, a small black speck appearing in the sky above the building. Quixotle kept talking. Anyhow, this bunch of Time Lords, they call themselves the Celestis, right? Decided to get one over on the enemy, a really smart move they made. The doctor crossed his arms as if to say, talk faster. Which was? They wiped themselves from the continuum. I mean, completely. What? Yep. The Celestis took themselves out of space and time, scratched out all traces of them ever existing in the physical universe, beating the enemy to it, kind of. That doesn't make sense, said the doctor. Yeah, it does. Because, and this is the clever bit, when they took themselves out of reality, like that, they put themselves on, another plane of existence. They kind of stopped being real and turned into ideas. Because you can kill a person, but you can't kill an idea. Get it? Quixotle shot a glance at the pic screen. The spaceship was growing larger by the second, its outlines slowly filling the sky above the ziggurat. Quixotle hoped the doctor wouldn't see it. He'd probably recognize the design, the smug git. The doctor, however, looked like he was a million miles away. I'm not sure I understand. The Celestis are Time Lords who put themselves into conceptual space. His eyes widened. He slapped himself on the forehead. You mean like the shift? Quixotle squirmed. Well, really. I'm not really supposed to tell anyone who the shift's working for. I see, the doctor nodded. Removal from the material plane, using some kind of technology that put the land of fiction together, I'd imagine. Ingenious. Totally mad, of course, but Celestis? He was talking to himself now, Quixotle realized. The Celestial Intervention Agency. It's their level of insanity. He stopped murmuring and glared at Quixotle, who quickly took his eyes off the pic screen. So the Time Lords need my body to stand a chance of survival, but you've decided to sell it to the highest bidder. It's like I said. The law of economics. Business is... I know what you said! Instinctively, Quixotle ducked. The doctor hadn't actually thrown a punch, but the outburst had been violent enough to leave a bruise. Do you have any idea what sort of fire you're playing with? The fate of my corpse could determine the fate of the entire lifeline. This auction could turn out to be one of the most important events in the entire history of sentient life. Mr. Quixotle cleared his throat. I was just thinking of my interests. Faction paradox! The Time Lords! The Celestis! What were you expecting to happen? Do you think they were all going to sit down round a table and talk about this politely? Well, yeah, actually. Look, Doctor, I don't think you understand the kind of profit margins we're talking about here. Profits! We're talking about the web of time, and all you care about is how Time Lord biomass is doing on the FT index. The doctor threw his arms wide, as if to call upon some ancient and terrible god of rhetoric. If you're so determined to put the whole universe in jeopardy, why didn't you just go the whole hog? Why didn't you just invite the Daleks? Immediately, Mr. Quixotle's eyes shot back to the pic screen. The doctor noticed this time, and turned to see what he was looking at. The black spaceship had touched down on top of the ziggurat, its underbelly flattening most of the roof garden. The doctor turned back to Quixotle, an expression of absolute horror on his face. You didn't, he said. Mr. Quixotle tried to look apologetic. 7. Surprised? Cousin Justine knew her arms were in the wrong position, even before she saw the wrench swinging back towards her face. In her own time, on her own planet, even the word physical had been considered slightly obscene. But the training on Dronid erased the old stigma. She wasn't ashamed of her body anymore. She knew the subtle equations that governed close-quarter combat, knew how to move with the opponent as well as against him. So, she knew there was no way on Earth she could stop the wrench before it smashed into the side of her skull. In the half-second she judged she had left before the impact, Justine told the grandfather what was happening and respectfully asked him to prepare a place for her at the family table. Naturally, the grandfather didn't deign to reply. The wrench jerked in Homunculus' hand. The rhythm was broken. The flow of combat changed in an instant. Justine rearranged her limbs without a moment's hesitation, readying herself for a counter-strike. Little brother Manuele was standing behind Homunculus, gripping the Time Lord's wrist with both hands. Justine hadn't noticed the little brother come into the room, and hadn't been part of the flow until now. He wasn't even a consideration. Homunculus didn't seem to notice Manuele was there. His eyes were still fixed on Cousin Justine, as if he couldn't understand why the wrench wasn't connecting with her head. Justine punched him in the throat. Homunculus gagged, then dropped the weapon. Justine lashed out again, barrel punching his neck. Homunculus didn't look hurt when he dropped the ground. Irritated, but not hurt. "Thank you, little brother," Justine said, once she'd caught her breath. Manuele gave her a quick salute, and a grin broke out across his face. Justine tried not to think of it as a nasty grin. In her own time, before the faction had found her, she would have considered Manuele to be the lowest form of human life, a creature that never even stood a chance of getting close to the grace of God. One of the criminal classes, and worse than that, a foreigner. Living proof that Mr. Darwin was nearer the truth than Justine's elders had wanted to admit. The faction had reconditioned her, of course. They'd taught her that all beings were one in the eyes of the Grandfather, that the real haves were those who found the spirits, and the real haven'ts were those who still believed in the deceits of the Time Lords. But every now and then a little piece of England would find its way into her thoughts, and she'd wonder what her family, her first family, her old family, her genetic family, would have said about the little brother. She'd tried dressing him up like a gentleman, but that was the only concession she'd made to her past. "I can't get up," said Trask. Justine turned. Trask was lying on his side near the doorway of the anteroom, his limbs perfectly stiff. He'd fallen like a skittle, though he didn't seem upset. Manuel sniggered. Justine shot him a warning glance. "Dead joints," Trask told them. "Not flexible." The doctor hopped up the last few steps of the stairway and found the gloom of the ziggurat giving way to the, frankly miserable, daylight of the rainforest. The roof of the building was small and flat, a square of off-yellow stone 60 feet or so along each side. Quixotle had done his best to turn the area into a pleasant little garden, compensating for the lack of soil by planting the flowers in bubbles of hydroponic liquid, which floated around the place on tiny anti-grav cushions. The bubbles were very well behaved, never floating above the eye level or wandering over the edge of the roof. There was also a large puddle of liquid in the middle of the garden, where the black spaceship had touched down and squashed all the bubbles underneath it. Some people had no respect for horticulture, the doctor told himself. Mr. Quixotle appeared at his side, breathing heavily after the run up 3 flights of stairs. As soon as he saw the ship, the man straightened his tie and brushed the dirt off his lapels. The doctor gave him a pitying look. "No excuse for looking shabby," Quixotle sniffed. I don't think they'll care much about your fashion sense," the doctor told him, matter-of-factly. "Not unless you're wearing a personal energy dispersion field and a 3-inch thick armor plating." Quixotle looked defiant, for once. "There's not going to be any trouble here, you know. Anyone attending the auction has to abide by strict rules of non-hostility. It says so on the invite cards. Absolutely no high-technology weapons allowed in the city, except for those that can't be separated from their owners' bodies." He indicated the ship with a wave of his hand. Their guns are detachable, aren't they?" The doctor shook his head. It was hard to believe even Quixotle could be this absurd. "And how are you going to enforce these rules of non-hostility precisely?" "Not a problem, believe me. The city looks after that kind of thing itself." "Dampening fields?" "Yep. Energy weapons and combustible artifacts don't function properly inside city limits. Except for cigarette lighters, obviously. Listen, I know how nervous you must be right now. The guys, the clients that are on that ship aren't going to be too pleased with you here, yeah? Maybe, you should get out of the way while you can." The doctor wondered if it was supposed to be a threat. "If the Daleks really are here, I want to be around to keep an eye on them. Don't worry, I'm quite good at making sure they don't kill me. I've had plenty of experience, some of it quite recent." "What do you mean, if the Daleks are really here? That's a Dalek ship, right?" The doctor took another look at the vessel that had parked itself on the roof. He hadn't paid much attention to the design before now, mainly because it wasn't very nice. Conventional spaceships weren't much to his liking anyways, but the black ship was little more than an ugly lump of metal with ion engines welded to the underside. "I don't recognize the shape," he admitted, "but black is a very Dalek color. Let me think. Late 21st century. By now, most of the Daleks are scattered around the edge of the Mutter's spiral, trying to build up a decent galactic power base. The ones who got left behind on Skaro are just starting to think about putting together their own little empire. The static electricity phase of Dalek development, if I'm not mistaken. Still, my Dalek history's always been a bit rusty. It wouldn't be so bad if it didn't keep changing all the time." Quixotl's response to all of this was drowned out by an unpleasant clanking sound from the bowels of the spaceship. As the Doctor watched a section of the hull detached itself from the ship's body, a hatch-cum-gangway, although the mechanism was so clumsy, it made the craft look like it was falling apart at the seams when it opened out. A few more dozens of flower bubbles popped under the gangway's weight as it thumped against the ziggurat's roof. There was a long pause. Nothing happened. "I think they're waiting for us to go to them," the Doctor said out of the corner of his mouth. Quixotl did another of his nervous little shuffles. Doctor, you do realize if that we go onto that ship, the city systems can't protect us?" "Oh, yes." "But then again, why would they want to hurt us, right? If they kill us, they won't get a hold of the relic." "True," said the Doctor cheerily. "Unless they torture us to find out how to bypass your security systems before they kill us." The pause returned, and this time it brought some friends along with it. "After you," said Quixotl. "Fair enough," said the Doctor, and strolled towards the gangway, waving a few of the flower bubbles out of his path as he walked. Bump. Bregman felt her head crack against one of the steps. She tried raising her hands to protect her face, but her arms were twisted behind her back. At least she guessed her arms were twisted behind her back. She couldn't actually feel them, though, so they could have been anywhere. Bump, bump. That might have been her shoulder breaking. Bregman didn't notice the pain, particularly. She was too busy concentrating on the voice. It was the same voice she'd heard when she'd first arrived at the ziggurat, not exactly inside her head, not exactly outside her head. It was louder now. She guessed she was getting closer to its source. Bump, bump, bump. Bump. Sam was somewhere above her, below her, whichever way was up, trotting down the steps and calling out her name. Kathleen. The name sounded funny for some reason. No one called her Kathleen anymore. She was Bregman, or Lieutenant, or Miss Chickenlegs to the rest of the staff at Geneva. Bump, bump. When had she stopped being Kathleen and started being Bregman? No, that wasn't important now, and besides, the voice was telling her not to worry about it. It was staring into her eyes. So so voices couldn't actually stare, so what? Smiling gently, and they couldn't smile either, but again, so what? All she had to do, the voice explained, was reach the body. It needed company. Human company. It had a message from the future, but only a human being would be able to understand it. No more bumps. She reached a landing, on the first floor below ground level. The stone underneath her was spattered with blood, probably her own. For a moment, she lost track of the voice, and that was when she noticed the pain. The nerves started untwisting her shoulders and legs. She felt blood trickling over her lips. For the first time since she started falling, she seriously considered screaming in agony. But the voice spoke again. Down, it insisted. The next level down. Bregman peered across the landing and saw the steps stretching out in front of her. She heard Stam stepping onto the landing behind her, breathing heavily. "What are you—" Sam began, but she shut up when Bregman threw herself down the next flight of stairs. Cousin Justine ordered Manuele to help Trask onto his feet, which didn't exactly put the little brother in a good mood. Manuele got a good whiff of the dead guy's B.O. while he was doing it. The stuff didn't smell of putrefaction or old meat or anything, but it wasn't a nice experience. Like sniffing chemicals. Kind of flat, kind of stale. Trask didn't even thank him once he was up and about. He just said something about the Time Lord being dangerous, then stomped out through the corridor. Justine kept her eyes fixed on the zombie as he lurched off down the corridor. She looked like she was going to start slobbering any minute. Wouldn't that be typical, thought Manuele, if she had the hots for a stiff? Bitch must have thought she was too good for anyone living and breathing. He'd been trying to get into the cousin's pants for months, first by playing the humble but obedient service, then resorting to the good old rough but good-natured street urchin act. So far, no progress. Sure, she was his cousin. She was supposed to be his elder in the family. But what the hell? "Got a present for you," he said. Justine noticed him, at last. Manuele stuck his hand in his pocket and pulled it out with the biosampler wrapped around to the knuckles. He waved it in front of the cousin's eyes so she could see how full the collection valves were. "Human girl," he said. "Found her in the No." Justine put her fingers to her lips. "Not here." Manuele looked over his shoulder. Homunculate lay on the floor of the other side of the room, face down in a puddle of his own spit. The Time Lord wasn't unconscious as such, but his senses weren't going to be doing much for the next couple of minutes. Justine had gone straight for the major neck nerves. They were big on Time Lord anatomy, back on Dronid. "Don't worry about him. He's not gonna hear a thing. Not him." Justine closed her eyes for a moment. Showing off, Manuele thought. Trying to look all serene and mystical. Bitch. "The shift isn't here. Good." "Human girl," Manuele repeated. "Found her in the old shrine. Lucky us." The biosampler wouldn't work in the city, Manuele had been told. But the shrine wasn't really part of the city, because it was in another dimension, or something like that. He didn't understand the technical stuff, but the principle was easy to figure out. The shrine was family territory. On family territory, you could do what you liked to outsiders, same as in Little Sao Paulo. He couldn't have done more to the unisick bitch than taken the biodata sample, but he could have done more than just to the unisick bitch than just taken the biodata sample, but he hadn't been in a good mood. Too skinny for him, anyhow. "How good a sample did you get?" "Deep as it gets. Deep as I could without ripping her up." "Enough for a control, right?" "Yeah. Good. Things are getting out of hand." She glanced at the wrench. The one homunculate had dropped on the floor of the anteroom. "We may need another agent soon." "Whatever," said Manuele. On the other side of the room, Homunculate started moving again, so Manuele crossed over to him and stamped on his head. The interior of the ship was black. Pitch black. Quixotle guessed he was standing in a short passage, maybe in an airlock tunnel, but the walls were sucking up the light from outside the hatch before it could reach his eyes. He'd waited a good 2 minutes before he'd followed the doctor into the guts of the ship, waiting to see if there'd be a heart-wrenching scream from inside. Obviously, there hadn't been. "Interesting," said the doctor. He was a little way in front of Quixotle, probably at the end of the tunnel. Oh, great. Trust him to get enthusiastic all of a sudden. "Why isn't there any light in here?" Quixotle mumbled. "Oh, there is. The walls are luminescent." "They're black, Doctor." "Yes, luminescent black. Humanoid eyes can't pick up the frequencies." Quixotle remembered how the guest room he'd prepared for the Daleks had looked. The room had been black as well, the walls covered with bumps and nodules Quixotle hadn't quite understood the purpose of. He hoped, really hoped, they hadn't anything to do with sex. There were some things he didn't want to have to imagine. "Yeah, well, my eyes are pretty much humanoid at the moment, and I've kind of preferred if I could see where I was going, you know?" he murmured. Don't worry. There should be a secondary lighting system on board somewhere. When they see we're coming... now that really is interesting. Quixotle realized the doctor was going to keep saying interesting until someone asked him what he was talking about. Okay, whatever made him happy. What's up? Touch the walls. Quixotle hesitated. I'm not going to get a shock or anything, am I? Just touch them. Nervously, Quixotle extended a hand and brushed the nearest wall of the tunnel. It was cold. Very cold. There was even a thin layer of frost on the surface. That isn't frost, the doctor said, making Quixotle wonder if the psychic dampeners he'd planted in his skull were playing up. Or at least three of the powers he'd invited to the auction were known to have rudimentary telepathic ability, so the dampeners had seemed like a wise precaution. Quixotle escaped some of the knot frost off the wall, and it crunched between his fingers. More like crystals, right? Stand back, I'm going to open this door. What door? There was a high-pitched squealing sound, followed by a drawn-out mechanical groaning. Even in the blackness, Quixotle could make out the wall at the end of the tunnel irising open. There was a wider area at the other end of the opening, presumably the control section of the ship, although it was too dark to be certain. A squat pillar box stood in the middle of the opening, a dark silhouette about the same height as Mr. Quixotle. For one horrifying moment, Quixotle saw himself as a cyborg might see him, a contour map of heat traces and biological functions. Interesting, the doctor said, irritatingly. Here, come and see. Quixotle didn't move. Doctor, look, I don't think you should, Oh, there's nothing to be worried about. It's quite dead. Dead? Are you sure? I'm sure. Take a look. So Quixotle took a look. In fact, when he was within spitting distance of the shape, he convinced himself to reach out and touch it. The surface of the thing was as cold as the wall had been, and coated with the same kind of crystal frost. Quixotle couldn't be sure in this light, but he couldn't see the telltale markings of a member of the Dalek race. No eye stalk, no sucker arm, no bumpy bits around the base. Is it he began. I don't know. Quixotle sensed the doctor frowning. It was alive, or partly alive. A life form with an outer metallic shell and an organic interior, but in this state it's impossible to say for certain what species it belonged to. Quixotle kept prodding the surface of the shape. He felt the dome at the top of his body crack under his fingers. What happened to it? Its cellular structure has been totally reconfigured. The outer shell's brittle, the casing has been turned into a semi-solid crystal. There, do you feel that? The doctor grabbed Quixotle's hand and forced him to stroke one side of the dead thing's body. Quixotle felt an enormous hole there. Something's forced its way into the interior and extracted the biomass inside. Quixotle put his hand away. What are you saying here, Doctor? The doctor patted the corpse on the top of its dome. I don't know whether this started out life as a Dalek or not, but whatever it was, it's effectively been peeled and eaten. Kathleen was still moving, in spite of the obvious minor injuries. Sam was out of breath by the time she reached the bottom of the stairs, but the lieutenant, who'd effectively taken the non-tiring way down, still seemed quite active. There was blood all over her face, and the stuff was still seeping out of the cuts in her forehead. The way she crawled, Sam guessed, most of her joints had been twisted out of position. Sam trotted up the corridor ahead of her and stopped right in the woman's path. Kathleen came to a halt at her feet. Her face was terrifying. Battered stupid, but still determined as hell, she looked like she'd just seen the oasis on the horizon. He's here, Kathleen croaked. Sam crossed her arms. Kathleen, you just bounced down 2 flights of stairs on your head. You're lucky you didn't break your neck. No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't let it happen. Who wouldn't? The voice, said Kathleen. She was listening out for something, Sam realized. So she listened too. I never give advice. Never, thought Sam. But there are terrible things in the universe that... Wait a minute. She was thinking rubbish. Concentrate, she told herself. You're getting distracted. But if you could touch the alien sand and hear the cry of strange birds and watch them wheel in another sky, then we'll burn that bridge when we come to it until it seems I'm some kind of galactic yo-yo. Can you hear it? Kathleen asked. Sam suddenly remembered what the doctor had said when they'd been exploring the ziggurat together. Are you psychic at all? The corridor opened a few meters ahead of them. The room at the end seemed darker than the other part of the ziggurat Sam had seen. Kathleen had already slithered past her, and now she was getting close to the entrance, slowly pulling herself to her feet. Sam hurried after her. The room ahead was, in short, a vault, but it wasn't as bad as the faction shrine. But it was getting there. The walls were the color of soot, made out of what looked like slime-encrusted brick. Huge, rusting nails had been hammered into the block and hung with iron chains for no particular reason. It was supposed to look like a dungeon, Sam realized. The torches only seemed to illuminate the edges of the room, leaving a great puddle of darkness at the dead center of the chamber. And in the middle of the darkness was a casket. It glowed, but the glow was only lit the box itself. The light somehow failed to reach the space around it. The casket was silver, roughly the same size and shape as a coffin. Its sides were perfectly smooth, and the lid engraved with two carefully carved symbols. Sam recognized the Greek letters, but wasn't sure which Greek letters they were exactly. The second one was probably Sigma, though. It was the relic. You could tell. You could tell because everything in the ziggurat seemed to lead here, to this precise position in space-time. Every centimeter of architecture, every word spoken by every one of Quixotl's guests pointed to this vault like a neon sign. It all came down to this. The casket was the center of the universe, and nothing else mattered. Sam saw Kathleen step forward. She was walking normally now, except for maybe the slightest of limps. Sam got the feeling the casket was waiting for her, calling her over, whispering, even breathing. The lieutenant stopped in front of the box. Sam was sure she saw the casket flare up when Kathleen got within touching distance of it. Silver light washed over her hands, and she raised them over the lid of the casket. The relic was sucking in air, taking a deep breath, anticipating. Kathleen put her palms on the surface of the lid, ready to open up the box and release the relic. "Where is Quixotl?" hollered Mr. Homunculate. "Get me Quixotl!" At the moment, nobody seemed to know where Quixotl was. Speaking for himself, Cortez wasn't particularly concerned. All things were one thing, he reminded himself. All souls were one soul. The world of matter would move as it would move, regardless of the vain attempts of mortal flesh to disrupt its ebb and flow. Although, to be honest, he was going to have to throttle Homunculate if the man didn't shut up soon. Homunculate lay on the floor of the anteroom, his hands behind his back. One of the death cultists stood guarding him, prodding him in the stomach whenever he tried to get up, but still failing to keep him quiet. The other cultist woman looked on without feeling. "Mr. Homunculate attempted to assault me," she explained, turning to face Cortez. The colonel nodded. "Violence is a transient state of unilluminated physicality," he recited. "Quite," the woman said. Cortez had awoken from his meditation a few minutes earlier to find himself alone in the guest room. Lieutenant Bregman had gone missing, presumably having been carried away by the aforementioned ebb and flow of material existence. The sound of caterwauling had led him here, to an anteroom close to the center of the ziggurat. "Animals! Heretics! Sadists!" yelled Homunculate. The cultists guarding him duly planted a foot in his groin. Cousin Justine kept her eyes fixed on Cortez. "I've been wondering about your place at this auction, Colonel. I mean no offense, but I think most of us were surprised to see humans in attendance here." A faint smile appeared on her face. "That is to say, representatives of the human race. Many of us still regard Earth as a low-interest world." "We've got a special interest in the property, Miss Justine," Cortez told her. "Unisic has a long-standing appointment with the man in the box." "Cousin Justine," the woman corrected him. "But it's the nature of your bid that interests me, Colonel. I'm curious to know what Mr. Quixotle is hoping to gain from Earth. Not technology, certainly, and not information, either. Earth has no temporal defenses. If our host wanted to know anything about your culture, he'd find it out for himself." "There's more to our existence than material concerns, Cousin Justine." Justine looked blank, although Cortez knew she understood him, really. "Then your bid—" "There are some powers in the universe that cannot be resisted," Cortez intoned. "The forces of karmic virtue and inner balance will be satisfied." Cousin Justine and her little brother exchanged glances. They looked confused, but Cortez knew it was only a front. Like him, they appreciated the fact that there were higher levels of existence, mysteries only the spiritually illuminated could fathom. If he'd for one moment believed he was alone in this understanding of the universe, he'd probably have gone mad. The male cultist jerked a thumb in the colonel's direction, then put a finger to his temple and twirled it around. Cortez guessed it was some kind of secret sign. No doubt the man had recognized him as a spiritual equal. Without warning, the air was filled with a high-pitched screaming sound, which seemed to ring out from every corner of the room at once. The toucans, Cortez realized. Out in the forest, the birds were screeching in agony, and the architecture here had obviously been designed to let the noise reverberate through the walls. It wasn't the first time he'd heard the alarm since he'd been in the ziggurat, but now the toucans were practically squawking their lungs out. Something brushed along the colonel's spinal column. He looked down at his shirt and caught sight of the letters moving around the face of his Unisic insignia. "The core defenses have been triggered," the shift reported. Cousin Justine had apparently seen the same message, though not necessarily in the same place. "Meaning?" "The defenses protecting the relic. 2 levels down." The other cultist hissed. "Someone's after the stiff." "Then they're not very intelligent. The defenses are programmed to take intruders to pieces. Whoever's in the vault, they're not going to get out alive. Wait, I'm going to try skimming the city's system. I'll see if I can identify them." There was a pause, during which everyone started squinting around the room to see if there were any messages in the stonework they'd missed. Finally, the shift returned. "Colonel Cortez," it said, "I'm afraid I've got some bad news." "You mean the ship's been attacked?" The doctor kept moving his hand across the interior of the wall of what he assumed was the black ship's control area. "I don't mean anything," he muttered. "But that thing, the dead thing, yeah? It was part of the ship's crew." "I should think so." "And something killed it." "Mm-hmm. Tell me, how many Daleks did you invite to this auction?" There was a moment's shuffling. Outside the ship, the toucans had started shrieking again, but you could hear Quixotle's nervous twitches even over that racket. "Just the 2. The invite specifies no more than 2 reps from any one, agency." The doctor finally found what he'd been stumbling for. A square projection set into the walls at waist height. He started fingering the mechanism. Sadly, it wasn't designed for anything with fingers. "So, if we assume this was a Dalek vessel, there should be another body somewhere on board," he paused. "Quixotle? Ah, yeah? There's something I've been meaning to ask you, and stop shuffling." "What?" "My body. How did you get a hold of it?" There was no reply. "If my body's so popular, a lot of people must have been waiting for me to pass away," the doctor continued. I'm assuming nobody thought they could take the risk of killing me themselves. My reputation must have been quite impressive before the end. Quixotle mumbled what sounded like a yes. I'd like to know how you managed to get your hands on it before anyone else, the doctor concluded. And I told you to stop shuffling. I'm not shuffling, Quixotle protested. The doctor fell silent. The shuffling went on. Oh, said Quixotle. Ah, said the doctor. He reached into his jacket pocket. Over the years, people had commented on his ability to produce exactly the right item from his pockets at exactly the right time. Some had speculated that his pockets were extensions of the TARDIS. Others had guessed he was just lucky. But then they'd never read Yellstrom's Karma and Flares, the importance of fashion sense to the modern Zen master. They didn't appreciate the things a sentient life form could achieve if he was totally at one with the lining of his jacket. The doctor pulled a sink plunger out of his pocket, thrust it into the mechanism in the wall, and twisted it a little. The secondary lighting system, the one the ship's original owners would have used whenever they had organic company-prisoners on board, was engaged. The doctor turned. The control section was circular, 20 feet from side to side, lined with black display panels and even blacker navigational systems. As far as the side of the area, in the position the doctor knew had to be the pilot's seat, was another lump of crystallized metal biomass. Seen in direct light, the thing was hideous, like a particularly extreme piece of a modern sculpture. The doctor was reminded of a half-used, half-melted candle. Straddling the dead thing was a decidedly alive thing. At first glance, it looked like a spider, a heavy body supported by narrow, overextended legs. Most of these legs were planted on the floor of the control section, though a couple were draped across the display panels. The limbs, the doctor realized, were shafts of flexible crystal, each one no thicker than a piece of rope. The torso was a shapeless lump of the same substance, much more dense than the legs, topped by a geometric head made up of precise triangles and rectangles. The thing had no face, although several delicate sensory extensions were arranged around the cranial unit, glassy blue feelers that swayed from side to side as if tasting the air. A single tendril extended from the underside of the being's torso, short but powerful looking. The tendril had punctured the dead creature's shell, and the doctor could see transparent vein-like tubes running along its length, some pumping digestive acid into the corpse, others transporting the liquefied biomass up into the crystal creature's body. The biomass was green when it left the cadaver, but by the time it reached its destination, it had crystallized and turned bright blue. Everything finally clicked into place. The creature wasn't really spider-like, not in its natural environment, but it was adaptable. The only solid parts of the being were the head, which contained the central nervous system, and the tendril. Whenever the creature moved from one kind of environment to another, it would shatter the rest of its body from the inside, and then use the tendril to absorb fresh biomass, say from any organic life form unlucky enough to be in the vicinity, and use it to grow itself a new shell. The being had attacked the ship, forced its way on board, and killed the original crew. The doctor couldn't see it standing up to the crew's weapons, with just the tendril, so he guessed the intruder had been armed. It had spent the trip here slowly absorbing its prey, saving up enough raw material for a new body when it arrived. The spider form was now what it had worn during the space flight, ideal for low-gravity conditions, but looking more than a little shaky now that it had reached Earth. Its legs trembled as it sucked the last of the organic matter out of the ship's pilot. The doctor took in the rest of the control area and noticed two things of interest. One was the look of sheer nausea on Quixotle's face. The other was a small crystalline growth attached to one of the navigational computers. The intruder had planted a suborganic control device in the ship's systems, making the vessel obedient to its will. The doctor had expected this, for the simple reason that he'd met these creatures before. But the last time he'd seen them, they'd been wearing much stockier bodies, better suited to life on a high-gravity world. The crystalline thing looked up, or rather, twisted its feelers towards the hatchway, its head spun on top of its body. "You are the being called Quixotle?" it groaned. Its voice was a monotonous electronic gurgle, like a man with a throat full of nails. The doctor pointed to Quixotle. Quixotle whimpered. "I have come to attend your auction," the intruder announced. Do you have an invite?" The intruder's head spun a little faster, so Quixotle raised his hands defensively. "I mean, not that you're not welcome, but security around here, if you're not on the guest list." "This vessel was intercepted mid-flight. I have taken possession of the invitation. I have already transmitted my biodata to your city's systems." "Oh, well, that's all right then." Quixotle shot the doctor an anxious glance. "Does this mean..." "It means the Daleks you may have invited are a no-show," the doctor told him, flashing a quick smile at the crystalline creature. "The Crotons have come to take their place." I think that's enough for tonight. Thank you all for joining me, and thank you to anyone who is listening to this ahead of time, or in the YouTube video after this. Have a good night. I love the Crotons. I love this reimagining of them. It's wonderfully inventive, and maybe one day they'll come back in the show. But regardless, what a wonderful callback to a lesser-known, I shouldn't say lesser-known, but a lesser-used creature. I always love the idea of aliens that are not organic in nature. It's such a fun concept. And the Crotons, if I recall the original look of them, they're not quite, what's what I'm looking for? They're not quite, humanoid. They're not humans, like the other, rock aliens that we've seen, like, the Hand of Evil people. I forget what their race is called, but they're also, like, silicon entities or something like that. Anyways, thank you all for listening. Have a good night. This has been Tom Mordred's Midnite Radio.